Okay. Ladies and gentlemen,
No, sir.
it's my honor and privilege tonight to introduce our speaker, Professor David A. Tizzard, who is presently teaching at Seoul Women's University as an assistant professor. Originally came from Dover, England. He has been living and working in Korea since 2005. During that time, he also completed his master's degree in Asian Studies at Sejong University, and presently he's finishing up his doctoral dissertation on similar topic as his presentation today. He also translated the bestseller memoir of North Korean, high-level North Korean diplomat who defected from North Korean embassy in London into English and used for his research. He also hosts a radio program in Korea, also has a weekly column at Korea Times. So without further ado, let us welcome Professor Tizzard with a big round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like this to be a seamless takeover from Mr. Chang, thank you, but I have to put this on, I've been told. One second. Yes, I shall. And Tom requires me to clap one time before I begin, correct? 3, 2, 1. It's probably the only applause I'll get this evening, but I'll make the most of it. Mr. Chang, thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Tizzard, or more recently, people have been referring to me as that K-pop sucks guy. It's an honor to be here at the Royal Asian Society Korea branch. I am a member, a proud member. Asiatic, sorry, Brother Anthony. I do sit at the back, so you might not have seen me, but it's very good to be here, and it's nice to see lots of other people here this evening. I hope that we can continue this going forward, help the society not only survive, but also prosper going forward. For my talk this evening on Britain-DPRK relations, I'm not going to take you through 18 years of diplomats talking to each other and ambassadors. So if that's what you were expecting tonight, I'm very sorry, you have been misled. What I'm going to do, however, is I'm going to present a different thing. For example, I'm more interested in first principle questions. My principal question is, why diplomatic relations? I want to know why these occur. And so I use Britain and the North Korea, the DPRK, as a case study to try to understand why diplomatic relations occur. I'm trying to understand the forest, and I will use this specific thing as a tree. Is it working, Tom? Excellent. Thank you for the moral support. And at the end of this, I would like to hopefully provide a vision. I attended an event last week in which we were given all these details about weapons, missiles, number 13 missile, number 14 missile, these tests, those tests. And at the end, an author, Michael Breen, asked a very pertinent question. Yes, but is there a vision? What does this all mean? So at the end of this talk, I hopefully provide you a little bit of a vision rather than details. All that said, I should probably start, and I'd like to walk about a bit. I'll start with a question and football because it's Britain. In the 1966 World Cup, hosted by England, which we were victorious in eventually, North Korea competed, but they were not known by their official name. They were known by North Korea, as you can see on the picture here. When they competed in the World Cup in Brazil, it was the DPRK. That is the official name of the country. During the 1966 World Cup here, North Korea. And there's a reason for that. And it's a very similar reason to why in England's first ever World Cup semi-final, which we played Portugal. I hope you can recognize these two gentlemen there. There's Eusebio and Bobby Moore. God Save the Queen was not played as a national anthem. And before big football games, as I'm sure you're probably aware, national anthems are played. At this game, Britain's first ever, England's first ever semi-final, it was not played for exactly the same reason. Here's a quick picture of the North Korean team at Goodison Park, the home of Everton, before their quarter-final versus Portugal. So why was it North Korea? Why was God Save the Queen not played for England's semi-final? For diplomatic reasons. And this is a little bit technical, but I'll move through it. The DPRK were not expected to qualify for this tournament. However, FIFA only gave one position for all of Africa and Asia to qualify for this tournament. So many of the African teams, they pulled out. They were upset that there's only one place available. And that left Australia, South Korea, and North Korea for one position. South Korea didn't want to play that game, so they pulled out, leaving North Korea and Australia to do a two-leg playoff in Cambodia, which North Korea won 6-1. And then there was trouble, because Britain didn't expect the DPRK to qualify. The DPRK was a member of FIFA, but it wasn't recognized legitimately by England. So the Foreign Office debated refusing them visas. Well, we won't give them visas. They cannot come here. That was their first thought. And similar things perhaps happened up to about 1980. They also, the British Foreign Office, they didn't want to play the national anthem of North Korea, and they didn't want to host the flag of North Korea because they believed it would be legitimizing the regime, and that was something that they didn't want to do. But FIFA is a very powerful organization, and England didn't want to lose this. It didn't want to upset the cart, so it had to come to a compromise. This doesn't quite reach this way. The compromise that it came to was they would fly the flag, and around Middlesbrough, where North Korea were based, the DPRK, lots of Middlesbrough flags were flown. Anthems would only be permitted for the opening game and the final game, and the DPRK were not expected to get to the final. So when they beat Italy, when they went 1-0 up against DPRK, there were probably people in the Foreign Office worrying at that time. But that's how it went. So the host country was not allowed to play its national anthem in a semi-final, in a quarter-final. No other teams competing there, except the opening and last games, could play their national anthems because a problem had arisen, and that was North Korea were there. And it really upset things, not in a bad way, but it made people evaluate, what do we do in this situation? Here's a quick picture of Pak Duik. He was the goal scorer against Italy. They say that there is a bronze football boot in Middlesbrough from where he scored, like a little statue. And every article you read mentions it. I can't find any pictures of it anywhere. I don't think it exists. That might mean I have to go to Middlesbrough. I'm not particularly looking forward to that. Apologies to anyone from Middlesbrough. This is the Pak Duik, and he walked the Olympic flame through Pyongyang. Perhaps we'll see similar scenes if 2032 goes ahead. There was just another sports-related one that I'd just like to relate to you. In 2012 at the London Olympics, by then diplomatic relations had begun, and this is the North Korean female team. They're up at Hamden, and they were playing a group game. I believe it was Colombia. And the information came up on the board, but they put up the wrong flag. They put up the South Korean flag. And I think you can see the picture here of the North Korean coach. He's not a happy bunny about what's going on. The North Korean team, they went into their changing rooms. They refused to come out. It was a great dishonor to them. It was a simple mistake. It was a simple mistake. But it caused a big problem. So just to start off with some football there and how diplomatic relations affect those. He's not British, but he plays a British man. So what does this all mean? Let's try to get to the idea. The first idea that I'd like to give you about North Korea is that in terms of diplomatic relations, it's not a hermit kingdom. It's not that isolated. Because we are in South Korea and we also have a large American contingent here, it does seem like it's far away. But in terms of diplomatic relations, that's not how North Korea works. It's not quite the hermit kingdom. I did find this very interesting, that somebody can visit for 3 days and then write a book on North Korea. Yeah, there you go. I haven't read it. let's have a look at DPRK relations. So I made some maps because visual stuff is a little bit better. After the end of the Second World War, you can see that most of the DPRK's diplomatic relations were centered around one geographic region and also one ideological region, perhaps. They were getting their neighbors involved with them in these diplomatic relations, and also the countries that perhaps shared similar ideology, political ideology or economic thoughts. There's a list of them there. In the 1960s, it went on a non-alignment push, and what this basically involved, for the most part, was lots of African countries. It couldn't get anywhere else, so it went into Africa, and it decided to get diplomatic relations from all these countries, and that meant that they recognized North Korea as an official government. Things really got interesting in the 1970s. This was a period of extended diplomacy. And if your eyes are keen, you will notice that Australia is in there. You notice that Portugal is in there. You notice that Sweden is in there. They were for very different reasons. Australia had a very progressive government that wanted to try to do things. Sweden believed the economic benefits would be great. One of the arguments that they put forward was that countries like North Korea, communist, socialist countries, have never reneged on debts. So let's get in there. That was their argument at the time. Portugal one was perhaps a little bit more, I will say nefarious, but I don't mean like that. But there were certainly suggestions that passports could be obtained or things like that. It was a doorway into Europe. However, 1970s saw a big, push for North Korea. 1980s was terrorism, and we had the attempted assassination of Chun Doo-hwan, which didn't go down well for North Korea. What I've read is that they thought they would get support from South Korea if they assassinated this military president. They'll be on our side if we do this. But they misjudged that. There was also the Korean Air flight in 1987 before the Olympics, trying to disrupt that. So the 80s, nothing really much happened. There's no sort of big gains for North Korea. And then in the 1990s to the 2000s, again, it's not really moving anywhere. Indonesia and Italy is notable at the turn of the millennium. There are two contrasting ideas why Italy did it. One, Italy wanted help solving the refugee crisis, people coming onto their borders, and they thought North Korea might have a better way of dealing with countries involved in that. The other argument is ethical foreign policy and human rights. This is where Great Britain comes in. This is where things happen, and this is what interested me. A cascade effect of UK-DPRK relations. So after the United Kingdom established them on December 12, 2000 in the morning, a whole host of other countries followed suit, and notable countries as well. With no disrespect to any countries, these were quite large. We're talking the Netherlands, Belgium, Canada, Spain, Germany, New Zealand, the EU in 2001. So that might be a very Eurocentric view that I'm taking there. I do apologize, but it seems to be a cascade was affected by Britain starting that, and I'm going to try to prove that that is true, or that's what people did think. So there's where Britain starts its relations, and then after that, it looks like that visually. So when I saw that, I again started thinking, why is Britain doing that? Why did it do that? It must have known what would have followed. There are 24 embassies currently based in Pyongyang. There's a list of them there. England is the United Kingdom is the only permanent member of the Security Council to have an embassy in Pyongyang. Long research question. This is what some of students like. Why did they do it? There's not going to be a single variant answer. There's not going to be one thing that determines why Britain did it. So I had to try to unpack it. I had to try to find out why they did do that. And that's where my work was taking me. I did some reading, some research. Eric Neumeier, he looked at 35 countries and tried to understand why this happens. Why do states do diplomatic relations? And he broke it down to geography, to power, national power, and ideology. And that sounds very good. I think the human mind is conditioned to understand things in three. have the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. We have Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva. If you go into a Buddhist temple, you see 1, 2, 3 big gold Buddhas and guns, germs, and steel. I think we're conditioned to understand things in 3, and so he used 3. Geography, power, and ideology. The closer countries are, the more likely diplomatic relations. The more national power they have, again, more likely, and ideological concerns. But that's not how it worked with Britain and North Korea. That goes against the perceived wisdom of why countries do this. 8,000 kilometers apart between London and Pyongyang. National power was very different when they did it. Britain was very strong at the time, North Korea not so much, and the ideologies politically, culturally, economically, very far removed. So it doesn't fit with the perceived wisdom of why countries engage with each other in diplomatic relations. So we're trying to build a bridge between Tony Blair and Kim Jong Il. Diplomatic relations, I'll do this very briefly because it can be a little bit tiresome, but 1274 BC, we have a written peace treaty between 2 states trying to hold each other together. Nixon and Mao's ping-pong diplomacy, kind of made famous by Forrest Gump, is also another example. Peace is war by other means is a nice phrase. Okay. Very briefly on diplomatic relations. George is better than war. Very famous phrase. Instead of fighting, we're going to talk to each other. That's one of the key things. It's very important. It entails recognizing the other as a sovereign entity and a legitimate form of government. Now, some may argue that happened in 1991 when South Korea and North Korea both entered the UN, that we were recognizing them as official governments. But if you have diplomatic relations with a country, then you are saying, okay, we accept your government as a legitimate entity. And I really find this strange, particularly in South Korea, how both countries, both Koreas, can spend so much time, energy, money, everything else on attacking, defending, dealing with the other, but from a legal diplomatic point of view, they think they don't exist. And that's a big paradox. That doesn't quite work out that way. They're spending all this money on them, but they won't recognize them as being there in terms of legal diplomacy. And countries place embassies and ambassadors in the other territory. I like to think of this in terms of the yang, in the yin-yang symbol. You have the white and the black going at each other. But generally, in the white, there's a little piece of black. And in the black, there's a little piece of white. And these relieve the tension. These allow things to flow. It's like if you're grilling sausages, you have to poke them a bit so they don't explode. It releases tension by putting a bit of you in there and a bit of them in you. That's what embassies and ambassadors do. And it can promote you. British national power might have decreased over the years. It's not the empire that it once was, but its diplomacy has always been very strong, and that's helped it. I like this expression of diplomacy. Diplomacy is the art of letting someone else have your way. That's what a successful diplomacy might be. This is how I tried framing the question. So I was confused, as I said, why they did it, and I wanted to look at Britain and North Korea. But I believe sometimes the truth is in the abstract. So the further away you get from reality, the closer you get to the truth. It's an old Platonic idea, the theory of forms. It's a Hindu idea with Maya. There's no reality there. And so I tried to go abstract first and lay it out in terms of a theory. My professor hates this. I'm not allowed to use this in my work because PhD students don't write theories. They're not allowed. But I'll do it tonight. Why not? So we have state A and state B. And I represent them as cogs because, right, countries turn. They're not static in what they do. Their economy goes up and down. Their politics goes up and down. The national morale goes up and down. We've seen it in South Korea from this year to last year. It's in an incredible state of flux. So initially I put them as 2 different cogs. I also had this thought. This was another thing that crossed my mind. Does North Korea do extended diplomatic pushes every 20 years? We know countries have 5-year plans. We know certainly that China has sort of a make China great again by 2025 and One Belt, One Road. It has long-term visions, and that's enabled by the type of rule that they have. It doesn't have the democratic transitions. So I did wonder, they did it in the 70s. Right? They had this big diplomatic push. And then in the late 90s, when it did it with Britain, again, there was a big diplomatic push. And now 20 years later, we're looking at South Korea, we're looking at President Moon going there, Singapore summits. Is it cyclical? Do they sit there and wait like waves coming in and out, like a tide, and go, right, let's go now, and then we'll come back and we'll wait? Is it just a matter of time? Or perhaps it's responding to changes externally in the system. So in democracies, when you have two parties or three parties, it veers between conservative and liberal. And so they wait until the liberal governments come in, because they do that in democracies. As much as we might hate the other guys being in power, that's what happens, and we have to deal with it. So do they just wait until the liberals are in charge, and then they go, right, get it now? Or is it because their own country is very poor, suffering? Maybe it's a case of all three. Maybe it's one. Maybe it's none of them. But I did wonder if the 20-year cycle was something to look at internally and externally. It's a very controversial man to put on a PPT. That's a young Henry Kissinger. He said this: when statesmen want to gain time, they offer to talk. It means they don't want to do anything. They don't want to change the status quo. It's a very cynical view. It's a very realist view. But I think that's something to remember when we see all the talking. It means nothing sometimes is happening at the higher level. Moving on. This is how I tried to connect them. So if we imagine State A is Britain, State B is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, people are important to connect them. The system is important. Whether it's the Cold War system, whether it's multipolar, whether it's a period of embracement or diplomacy, allies and neighbors, what's going on, and finally, North Korea. All of these things I thought would be important, and they would all have to kind of line up to get these two disparate states in terms of geography, power, and ideology to come together. They would all have to sort of align, and maybe if one's out, doesn't work. Maybe it's just sort of luck of the draw in that regard. Let's have a look specifically at Britain and North Korea and Britain's refusal. The first one is not really a refusal, but relates to the Korean War. And now Britain would have had a choice in this. It was an obvious choice at the time, but it had to decide, who do we side with in this situation? We've just finished the Second World War. The country is in a very difficult position. You might have people on rations and such forth. And so it had to consider what was going on over there and what position it would take. Obviously, it was going to side with the Republic of Korea and American forces and UN, but it did so by referencing the Great Game and to stop Russia. So this is the Permanent Undersecretary at the Foreign Office, William Strang. He said, to deter the Soviet Union from attempting aggression elsewhere. So again, this is a very cynical view. We didn't do it for the lives and the interest, of course we did, of the Korean people. But there was also this element that Russia was a threat and it was national interest. So we had to side with South Korea. And by doing that, according to the Hallstein Doctrine, by siding with South Korea, you cannot side with North Korea. You are forced to choose. It's a zero-sum game. If you have this one, you can't have this one, and vice versa. It's a very interesting picture of Lankov here. I like this one. Dr. Lankov. He said the principle ended quietly in 1969, and then two countries. You could be diplomatically aligned with both of them. So in the 50s, it wasn't possible. Chad and the Central African Republic were the first countries to have diplomatic relations with both. Elsewhere, I've read that it was in 1973, Park Chung-hee allowed this Hallstein principle to end in one of his speeches and said, that's okay. So when the 70s came around, Britain technically could have engaged in diplomatic relations with North Korea. The principle was now in place that it could do it. Here we have a picture of Harold Wilson, who was twice Prime Minister. I've been reading, it's dangerous to mention this, I guess, but I've been reading Margaret Thatcher's Downing Street memoirs because I like to read. I'll read anything, and that doesn't particularly ascribe a political allegiance of mine, but I was reading that, and throughout the whole of her memoirs, she describes 70s Britain as this socialist country, this sort of communist country that she had to turn around, this lady's not for turning. I found that a very interesting view, I guess. I wasn't born in the 70s, so I'm going on that. Australia said yes to North Korea. New Zealand considered saying yes, and Britain, when faced with this opportunity, also gave heavy consideration to engaging diplomatic relations in the 70s. Ultimately, it chose not to, and there are a few reasons for that I know of. One of them was economic pressure from South Korea and America. They said, don't do it. If you do that, we might not be friends with you anymore. We'll be friends, but the economy might take a hit. There's big diplomatic pressure from these two countries, and that's fair enough. You know, we've stood with those countries through thick and thin. There was also misgivings about it. So it wasn't economic, it was, shall we do it? William Bentley, British head of the Far Eastern Department, he said, British recognition of the North would lead to a number of other countries following suit. So it was a case of Britain thinking, well, we might want to do it. It might be in our national interest. It might be something that we can go for. But what effect will that have on the system and all the other countries? Britain traditionally has been sort of like a balancer, the offshore balancer in Europe. So a stated reason here was because other countries would follow suit. And that ties in with what happened in 2000. It's young Winston Churchill, echoing the lines of John Donne, no man is an island. We can't think of ourselves alone, so perhaps that was creeping in. Adam Foster Carter, at the time, he quotes a member of the Foreign Office, we do not recognize North Korea as a state, nor the authorities there as a government. That's a pretty strong thing to say in the 1970s, and that was to change. It's there. North Korea is there. Its government is there. As a state, it's there. But Britain is essentially saying, no, you're not there, in diplomatic terms. The UK was very strong at this time. We had Tony Blair, May 1997, landslide victory coming into power after years of conservative rule with Margaret Thatcher and John Major. And it wasn't just a new policy. It was Cool Britannia. It was like the swinging 60s again. It was Britpop. It was Blur and Oasis. Noel Gallagher using Union Jack guitars, meeting Tony Blair at Downing Street. It was cool to be British again at this time, socially. If it's ever cool to be British, I'm not sure about that. There was also foreign policy reform. Robin Cook came in and he expressed a new ethical foreign policy, whether that's true in reality, but that was the label. It was an ethical dimension to the foreign policy. There's a wonderful book by Richard Dickey called The New Mandarins, in which he describes these reforms that went through. And social morale was very high. There was less desire for war. There were protests against military action in Britain. Just to give you some graphs of what I've been researching, when Tony Blair came in, the approval rating was above 70. That's pretty high for a new coming in prime minister. That's really, really high. It dipped a bit, but up until 2000, it was still over 50%. And he had big public support in that way. In terms of the Foreign Office reform, this is a list of the countries that Britain engaged in diplomatic relations. And if you look closely at them, there's some very interesting countries in there, because I'm only talking today kind of about North Korea, but Afghanistan, Libya, Haiti, with no disrespect to the countries, Iraq. It was really looking at places on the map that it didn't have things and saying, let's do something about it. Let's approach these countries and let's engage in them. And it wasn't just North Korea. There was a bigger, broader push. This is a map that I made of British public support for military conflict. So it starts with the Second World War. Basically all of Britain was for, not all, the vast majority of Britain was for military conflict, support for military conflict at that time. The Falklands War, again, it was still the majority position. By the time you get to Iraq, 1991, the first Gulf War, it was kind of mixed. When we get into 2000, when the relations happened between Britain and North Korea, you can see for the first time in the last sort of half century that public support was not for war anymore. It was a different social mood. It was a different condition in the people. That had changed. North Korea had changed. North Korea was very weak. That's not a picture from the time, but I thought it illustrated the point that I was trying to make. There was the famine, and that's a whole nother talk in itself. Lots of different people give reasons for the famine. B.R. Myers said it was ideological, the death of Kim Il-sung, and then the 3-year Confucian mourning period before Kim Jong Il came in. Oberndorfer in the Two Koreas says it was floods, and Eric Cornell, who worked at the Swedish embassy from 1975, he wrote a great diary, memoirs, really nice book, said it was a lack of socialist assistance. That sort of Russia was gone, it wasn't helping anymore, it was alone. There were also defections, of course. Hwang Jong-yeop came to Seoul. He reportedly wasn't pleased with Kim Jong-il's reforms and what was going on. It wasn't pure anymore. Also, diplomats located around the world were being called back to make sure that they didn't defect and run away. So there was a lot of political unrest and economic problems. This was the first time that the North Korean regime had asked the outside for help. Please help us now. Previously, it had not done that, to the best of my knowledge, and I believe I read this in Tae Yong-ho's book, but it had not done that yet. So it was very weak, we might say. I made graphs when I was bored on this, sorry. EU humanitarian aid to the North Korea, DPRK, just before the relations in 2000, it was really, really low. We weren't giving them anything. It was low, according to this chart. And I like this, the nature of Kim Jong-il's appearances, because it's a regime that is very much based on appearance and what it looks like to the outside world. His military in 1998, this should say 1999, sorry, 2000, his military appearances were dramatically decreasing. His external ones, based on culture and diplomacy, were increasing. So they were trying to change his perceived image to the outside world, if we take B.R. Myers' 3-track approach. And Fyodor Tatitsky wrote a very interesting article in NK News where he said that they were giving Kim Jong-il around this time qualifications from external universities. He published this and he published this. So they were really trying to change the image of Kim Jong-il at the time. In 2000, so much happened. Right? And it could go through all of these. I just made a little list around that year when things kicked off. And just before that, Bill Perry in Pyongyang. But all this is basically the world leaders meeting each other, going to each other's countries. So we've had a Trump-Kim summit, and it's big news. But if we take a look at this, you had Zhang in London, then Putin in London, then Kim Jong Il in Beijing for his first foreign visit, Clinton in Moscow, Kim Dae-jung in Washington, Kim Dae-jung in Pyongyang, Putin in Beijing, Putin in Pyongyang, Zhang in New York. Jo Myung-rok, the North Korean general, was the first North Korean to go to the White House, meet Bill Clinton. The Assam, Albright, then Putin. There's a lot of action going on there. There's a lot of people meeting with each other, shaking hands, breaking bread, and finding out what to do. A time of huge diplomatic maneuvers. Britain had 3 choices, I think, at this time. It could accept the de facto existence of North Korea. Yeah, we know you're there, absolutely, but we're not playing with you, essentially. We know you're there, you're part of the UN, that's enough, no more than that, thank you very much. It could, on the other hand, take a hardline approach. Well, we know you're there, and we're going to put sanctions on you. And we're going to try to squeeze you, we're going to try to tighten that noose and provoke you into something very different, hopefully changing, reforming, opening up. The third one would have been, well, okay, we'll do diplomatic relations. And it chose the third one. It chose the third way. This is really important. This is the third Asia-Europe meeting in Seoul. There's Kim Dae-jung here. You notice the date, October 20th. It was held over 2 days. Bless you. It was held over 2 days. October 20th. On October the 20th, the same day that the ASEM meeting was started, David Rennie in Beijing reports that Britain will renew ties with North Korea. Interestingly, in the report, the move follows a request from North Korea. They asked us, so we said yes. That's why it happened. That's what the reports say. Robin Cook, speaking in Seoul on the same day. The letter we received last month, we're saying yes to. North Korea asked us, we're saying yes. You can see a similarity in the reports and the position. Going to support South Korea's moves. The ideology or the theory behind it, open up the walls of isolation for North Korea to accept its obligations to the community. So it's like a social contract. If you come in here, then you will have to play. We won't change you. You will change yourself by being part of the system. This is Dr. James Ho, Jim, and here he is in Pyongyang, on the SS Pyongyang, on the Taedong River, and he has the same theory. During the summer, the DPRK foreign minister wrote to those European countries and said, let's do it. Seems very clear. This is one of the reasons why I started this topic. When Dr. Ho said, I woke up one day and all of a sudden they said, we're going to do it. And he's the man that was meant to know everything in this field. And he says that they got off the plane in Seoul and the decision had been made. Something happened on that plane, but he didn't know why at the time. These are his words. And I was like, wow, I want to find that out. Why? If he didn't know, let's try to find out. The classic example might be Palmerston. England has no perpetual friends or enemies, only perpetual interests. We can change all the time. We can be on Germany's side today, we can be on Russia's side tomorrow, as long as it's in our interest. It's a very constructivist approach. Let's take a North Korean perspective. Let's go to the other side. And for this, I've been reading, and just for my own personal use, by the way, trying to translate Yong-ho's book. It takes me a long time, and I'm very busy with other things, but I upload my translations onto a blog for people. Here's a picture of Yong-ho in Panmunjom, September 2001. This is from Dr. Ho's collection. He looks young and sprightly. He speaks very highly of Yong-ho's English, and he's working with him. They've spent a lot of time together. In Yong-ho's book, he explains that the British government was seeking private contact with North Korea, going back to 1995, things coming from Beijing. Why? So they chart it back differently. And why was it doing that? Because after the 1994 agreed framework, Geneva thing, America wanted Britain, according to North Korea, America wanted Britain to get close to North Korea, to spy on them, to do some James Bond stuff or something like that, I'm not sure. But it wanted them to move close, so it was America's insistence. This is from Kim Jong Il, translated from... Yes. Okay. Popcorn, ice cream, jelly. Jelly deals, governor. Good to go, Tom? Okay. Can I talk anyway? We'll just pretend. I don't know why, but I have to do that, sorry. So this is a quote from Kim Jong Il taken from Yong-ho's book. It's my own translation, so you might have a better grasp on it than me. He said to Kang Sok-ju from the Foreign Ministry, it's interesting that Britain, America's Western ally, has approached us first. It must have been debated between them. But this is not bad, because maybe if we get close to Britain, we can have diplomatic relations with other countries. So there's that idea again of the cascade. It comes up more than once that if North Korea and Britain can get together, it will enable other countries to get together. And Kim Jong Il is saying it might encourage other European countries to follow suit. This is Yong-ho quoting Jim Ho in his book, just a bit. In this meeting in Geneva, if you become a member of the international community, we will have diplomatic relations with you. Come and play the game, and we will give you this. So, according to Yong-ho's book, Britain asked it, come and play the game, we'll give you this prize. When it was announced, the British response was, they asked us. So it's a bit like some things. The foreign ministry, this is interesting, and I know the foreign ministry in North Korea, I don't think, does foreign policy. It comes from the party, essentially. But it said because of the Inter-Korean summit, other countries are now going to accept us, be more likely to engage in diplomatic relations, thanks to Kim Jong Il's work. And that made me wonder, could that be one of the reasons why they did it? I know there was X amount of money that was transferred and went across. I mean, Donald Kirk wrote a wonderful book on Korea Betrayed and things like that. But I wonder if there was also, from the North Korean perspective, well, we'll do this because we might also be getting this. And I think that's something not really considered too much. Kim Jong Il to Kang Seok-ju from Yong-ho's book. And I would like to, if anyone can speak Korean, imagine what that first sentence was in Korean. Imagine Kim Jong Il saying that over the phone to you. What does your delegation think it's doing? I can't remember what the original Korean was, but when they were negotiating diplomatic relations with the European countries, a lot of the countries were saying, we'll do it, but we're not having an embassy there. We'll do it, but our ambassador's in Seoul. And so Kang Seok-ju and Yong-ho, they said no, and they walked out of the meetings because that was Kim Il-sung's methodology for them to use, and they were very proud of themselves. And then they were going to get congratulated by Kim Jong Il for upholding the party. And then he phoned them up and he said this to them, essentially, you idiots, what are you doing? Get back in there now and accept the relations. But why? Because look at the US presidential election. The Republican George W. Bush won. We need to get this sorted before he comes into office. North Korea definitely looks at what's going on in domestic politics in America, at midterms, in England. It's got its eyes on the outside world. So throughout Yong-ho's book, the George W. Bush government is called neocons. They know what's going on. They know the ideology, and they wanted to get these diplomatic relations done before he came into office in January 2001. That was the North Korean plan. France said no. I think this is a whole nother subject, but I did like this picture of former French President François Mitterrand. He went to North Korea with Kim Il-sung there. But throughout this European thing, France was having none of it. Human rights, and France is the offshore balancer in this regard. Glyn Ford reports, this is quite interesting, that the Rodong Shinmun in the early 2000s ran articles and series saying that the EU was the hegemonic challenger to America. Who can save us? It wasn't China at the time. Who can save us? The EU. So in that sense, it's called North Korea's pivot to Europe. We're going to get attacked by America. They're coming. The conservatives, they want to bomb stuff. And to a certain extent, they were right. And so what did they do? They ran towards Europe. They sided with Europe for protection. And Europe acquiesced, or at least Britain did. On December the 12th, 2000, diplomatic relations, this is Sir John Kerr, were signed in London between Britain and North Korea. On the same day, it was announced that George Bush had won the election. It's probably a wonderful coincidence that it worked like that, but it's great for this work. But there's the paper from December the 12th, and that's the day the diplomatic relations happened. So the timing was just on. They got it right. Recounts of votes in Florida in American politics. It always happens, doesn't it? I mean, it's not new. There's another wonderful story about December 12th. I was looking for any other significance to that day, and December the 11th, the night before, around London Heathrow, it was the warmest day on record since meteorological accounts had been taken. It's the middle of December. It wasn't particularly warm, but it was the warmest one that they'd ever had. And so it's, for a storyteller, it's wonderful, because the Cold War thaw is going. Temperatures rising, Cold War's going. That's what it looks like. I'm not allowed to put that in my PhD either. No storytelling, just graphs, okay? no puns either. Putin in a good word. It's a young picture of Vladimir Putin. He takes a lot of credit for this, actually. He takes a lot of credit. In an interview that he did with Le Figaro, the magazine in France, in 2000. And before I tell you that, the Kremlin's websites are amazing to use in English. Much better than Hansard, much better than the American ones. Wow, so good, the Kremlin. Websites. The interview with Le Figaro, October 26th. He says, Putin, we have recently done a good deal towards that end. In fact, we have helped North Korea to break out of its isolation, which enabled it to establish a dialogue with those whom, until recently, it considered to be bitter enemies. We helped. We tried to sort this out. Putin is saying there. And if you look at the meetings he had, you might find some truth to that. He certainly was a key player. But in his own words, he said, we've done a good deal and we helped that. Here's Bill Clinton. On the same day, I showed you October 20th that Britain announced it. The Washington Post was putting out things saying that Clinton was going to go to North Korea. Albright was going on Sunday, that weekend. And both sides declared their intent to end the Korean War. History not repeating itself, I guess, in that sense. This is one of President Clinton's last statements before he left office. December 29th. He's just about to leave. Britain and North Korea had got the relations done before George Bush came in, which seemed very important. Bill Clinton said, there is not enough time while I'm president to prepare the way for an agreement with North Korea that advances our national interest. Doesn't matter if I want to do it, it matters, is it good for America? So there he's not thinking about personality. There he's not thinking what's good for his legacy. Actually, he had two choices, to solve the Israel-Palestine issue or to do the Korea issue. He chose Israel-Palestine. But the reason he didn't do North Korea was national interest, he says. There's some Kim Dae-jung quotes, but everybody looks at Kim Dae-jung as helping this. He was so pivotal, so key. And I think that's a whole nother presentation for somebody else to do. But I'd like to move on quickly and come towards the end, the vision, what I want. The results, Britain was very strong. It was looking to demonstrate its power. Hans Morgenthau, the political scientist, said that states try to do one of three things. It's always related to power. They try to demonstrate, to maintain, or to increase. One of those three. It's always one of those three. Britain was trying to demonstrate its power at this time. Look how strong we are. In terms of individual influence, Putin, Clinton, Kim Dae-jung, they were all helping the process. In terms of the systemic environment, it was a time and a world of diplomacy and action. The time was right. The neighbors, the countries themselves, South Korea, Russia, China, that was all good. And North Korea was weak, looking to increase its power. So these things all lined up at the right times for it to happen. If one of them was not there, maybe Britain and North Korea wouldn't have done it. Maybe they would. Maybe it would have been harder. Maybe in the future, if we're looking for relations, and that's why I do my research between South Korea and North Korea, and I mean diplomatic relations, between Japan and North Korea, between America and North Korea, maybe this is what we should be aware of. Probably you cannot make it happen. These kind of things. You can't force this, but if you're aware of it, if my theory's right, which it might not be, but if you're aware of this, then you might be able to strike when the opportunity is there and say, wow, these are lined up, let's do it now. The result is this is the British Embassy in Pyongyang, and this was Jim Ho's desk when he first went there as chargé d'affaires. It's very small. I think there's a picture of the Queen there at the back. Now, I want you, as I come to my conclusion here, to look at this picture and realize that when Britain and North Korea went into diplomatic relations, there was no fanfare. There was no trumpets from the rooftop. There was no pool of international reporters descending into London to monitor, to record, to report this event. It just happened. And now compare that to this. And compare that to this. They're absolutely different. The word of the day these days, the word du jour is optics. And I believe this is just what these are. They're optics. They're things designed to look good. They're things perhaps to boost the individual ratings of these people. This is great for Donald Trump, President Trump. This is great for Chairman Kim. This is also great for President Moon. But it doesn't get anywhere. They're just pictures. And now more and more people discuss foreign policy, international relations, because they saw a picture on the internet. Now I know what's going on. And you've seen with the Remembrance Day services in France, there was a picture, many pictures, one of Trump and Putin and doing these things, and everyone's like, yes, that's what's happening in international relations because I saw a picture. The pictures are bad. The pictures are not the way forward. And what is the way forward is the small steps that are not pictured, the small steps between diplomats, the diplomacy which is by necessity often kept secret, which is very hard to get to. Pyongyang wants and needs a long-term relationship. It doesn't want a one-night stand. The Singapore summit is a one-night stand. Wham, bam, thank you. Kim doesn't rhyme. I'll think of another one. But there's no lasting effects on this. It's great for the moment, but then it's over. It fizzles out. And this is no good if you want peace, stability, and security. And I believe this is what Britain's relationships are doing with North Korea. They're providing long-term understanding, people on the ground solving problems. They're putting the yin-yang together. They're putting the white in the black and the black in the white. They're going through day-to-day troubles. They're building friendships. They're arguing with each other, but they're doing it constantly. And if you live with some people, if you have lodges, if you're in there, you're going to understand it more, rather than just a one-day photo, which South Korean and American leaders seem to keep wanting, especially, again, South Korea. Here's a photo of Jim and his wife in North Korea. And I'm going to show you just a couple more photos here. Here he is in Haeju, giving vaccines to children as a member of the British Embassy, doing this. His wife organizing fairs in Russia, in Pyongyang with the Russian ambassador's wife. I believe he told me that the Russian ambassador was killed in Turkey recently. There's the car in Pyongyang, in North Korea. I love this photo. Head of the European Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kim Jong Il. And he looks like any old ajoshi up in Gangwon-do. I'm an ajoshi, so no disrespect to ajoshis. Looks like any old Korean man in a stream having fun. That's what long-term relationships give you. Gives you these photos. It gives you these things. Donald Trump does not see them like this. South Korean people, well, maybe they do to a certain degree, but these are the photos that they want to have more. This is for Queen Elizabeth's birthday, a series of ambassadors together aboard the SS Pyongyang. This is Tae Yong-ho at Jim Ho's 70th birthday party in London. Still friends. Still speak highly of each other. Go to each other's events. Contact each other. It's a long-term relationship that's built up over time. So in my work, I really tried to understand why diplomatic relations happen, and I used Britain and North Korea as a case study. It was very difficult to understand why it happened, but I think it's a very important question. I think it's a very important question because if we're looking at a long-term vision and we're not looking at types of missiles, we're not looking at nuclear weapons, we're not looking at human rights, all very important things, I'm not saying they're not, but if we want a long-term vision, and I said when I did my theory, I got away from the reality and into the abstract because that's where the truth is. That's the Platonic idea. That's the Hindu idea. I think it's very true here. We get so bogged down in these details and that it misses the forest for the trees. It creates a huge problem. So in terms of a vision, I would suggest that it would be wonderful if President Moon stopped doing photo ops with Kim Jong Il. I know it means well, and I know it's very effective, and it's changed the atmosphere. And this is a very controversial thing for me to say. I wish he would just step back and say, well, the first thing we'll do is We'll recognize you as a government, as a state, because you're clearly there, and then we'll go from there, but no promises, and we're not sure what's going to happen, but it's not going to be fancy, it's not going to be glitzy, it's not going to make a lot of attention. We're not going to give it a lot of attention, because maybe that's what North Korea wants. It wants this constant media press, it wants these gangster remarks that it comes out with. So I think the process needs to change for countries like the Republic of Korea and for America. And I think it would be really interesting if the process did change in a few years, if there was a North Korean person standing here giving this talk, if there was somebody explaining things from their perspective, and standing here in front of the Royal Asiatic Society, giving their point of view about how these things changed. It's not possible at the moment. I would like to make it possible. No. I would like it to be possible. And I believe that happens from very small beginnings, but the small beginnings are possible through diplomacy. So that's what I would. And I started with announcing myself as the K-pop sucks guy, so I will finish on a similar thing with the Beatles, who are better than BTS. I'm sorry. I am he, as you are he, as you are me, and we are all together. I hope you know the name of the song. If you don't, it doesn't matter. But the point is there. We're here, you're there. Let's recognize each other, and let's move towards the hard work of living together, because living together is not easy. Ladies and gentlemen, that kind of brings the end for my part of the talk. I will allow, so if you have any questions or comments, but before I do, having imparted on that vision, I would like to give the opportunity to a gentleman in the room, His Majesty's Ambassador in Pyongyang, the British Ambassador to North Korea, Mr. Alistair Morgan. If you would like to come up and say a few words, sir.
Thank you very much indeed for a very interesting talk with some very good images. You say there should be fewer pictures, but I enjoyed yours. I'm being told to hold the microphone closer to my mouth, and I watched this headset with interest. Those of you who've watched the British television program The Ambassadors know that every self-respecting embassy has a group of security service people from the host country sitting in a small room with headsets like this, listening to their every word. And I'd like to reassure you that in Pyongyang it's no different, and there's quite a rustling above our residence block. Of course, it may be the squirrels, but we'll find out sometime. I would just like to say a few things. One, about the process of establishing diplomatic relations when it occurred, and very interesting background and a very broad look at the things that were going around at the time, along at the time, that had a bearing on it. I suspect we've forgotten quite why it happened, but the image we have now that we tell ourselves is that it happened because we were encouraged to do it by the Republic of Korea, and it was very much part of the view that the way to get the North to adapt in ways we wanted, was to engage with it, to show that even an old imperialist force like the United Kingdom actually had something to offer North Korea, and that the external world was not just an ideologically hostile world, and that we felt by those small steps we could draw them out. That may not be actually what happened, or why it happened, but it's how we talk to ourselves now about what happened. I'd also say that we do suggest too that some of these strategic decisions are not necessarily taken strategically, and that probably the North Koreans are better at planning and having a singular approach to what they're trying to achieve than maybe a country like Great Britain, where there may be lots of divergent views, and there may be personalities. And it may be actually that the individual thoughts of a single person, the Secretary of State, and his view of what should be achieved and how to achieve it can mean that something that has not happened for a very long time gets decided on a plane flight. I was interested to see the picture of the Jim Ho's office, partly because that's my office now, though I have a better desk. But what particularly interests me about the picture is that we're not actually allowed to take pictures inside the Chancery building in case they're of use to anybody. And I also was interested to see, and I'm going to take this back to Pyongyang, that having sat in darkness in that office for 3 years, because I was told by my deputy head of mission sitting here that for security reasons I had to have the blinds down, and that's very good advice. Jim didn't have the blinds down, but perhaps when Jim was there was less to see. The issue arose while I was in Pyongyang in 2016, 2017, when we had 3 nuclear tests and not quite, but coming up for 50 ballistic missile launches, of whether we should be there. Had that policy that we'd been trying to follow of engaging with the DPRK, of seeking to draw them out, of speaking to them critically about the things we thought were wrong and that should change, things that they, of course, argue are right and don't wish to change, or did argue, had that had any effect? And we came under a certain amount of pressure from certain people in the United States to say that we shouldn't be there. And I also came under a certain amount of pressure when I came here. I can think of quite senior people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here, people I like and respect, who said, really, in order to put pressure on the DPRK to get them to change, because they must stop the nuclear program, and we're not managing to get them to do it, you should withdraw. You should not be there. I'd like to say that the US voice was far from monolithic. And I think, like the UK, it is a big system with a lot of people with divergent views, and sometimes policy that gets formed by the clash of those views and not necessarily by the concertion of those views. But we strongly believed that it was right for us to keep the embassy open. It's a very small embassy. It's only 5 diplomats with 4 local staff. And you should not exaggerate what 5 people can do. If you think of powerful organizations in the world, organizations like Google or Facebook, they have a lot more than 5 people doing what they're doing. But we can do something. And we argued that we should be there on various grounds. First of all, there was a negative argument. That the fact that we were there did not stop us from doing other things. So it's probably more important for Britain that we're part of the Security Council and that we're taking part in the debates and forming the resolutions about North Korea in the Security Council than that we have an embassy in Pyongyang. Both are important, but I would say being a member of the Security Council is more important. And the fact that we have an embassy in Pyongyang and that we need to take care of our people in Pyongyang and have a concern for our diplomatic relations there, some people would say might stop us from doing other things which the North Koreans do not like. It might stop us from putting pressure on North Korea. And we made it very clear that if we believed we should be doing something to criticize and to try to stop the nuclear program, or to criticize and to try to change the abuse of human rights, the fact that we had an embassy would not stop us doing that. It might be something that we didn't do. I might not be up speaking in public vocally about human rights. Others might do it, but we wouldn't let our relations stop that. So that's a negative reason for maintaining the embassy, because it doesn't stop you doing the other things you think you need to do, and you can do some small things as well. I don't believe we were asked to go to North Korea by the Americans to spy on North Korea. Jim, when he set up the embassy, Yong-ho is a researcher and an academic. He is not a spy. At least I don't think he is. He's got very good cover if he is a spy. Never quite be too sure. But we do observe. And maybe what we would regard as observation, actually the North Koreans might regard as spying, because we look around us very carefully and try to say what is going on. And of course, as an ambassador, I'm doing that to my government. I report to my government. I represent my government. I don't represent any other government. But the fact that in that small diplomatic community, there is no America, there is no Australia, there is no New Zealand, there is no Canada, there is no Republic of Korea, there is no Japan, does mean that what we see on the ground is of interest to others. So it's unusual and to be a part of the role of an ambassador to travel to other countries outside the one to which he's accredited. But that's an explicit part of my job as ambassador, and it will be Colin's job when he takes over from me in just a month's time, to go to these countries, to share what we can observe and our views and assessments from what we can observe. And it's just a small thing. There's much we don't know, far more that we don't know than that we do know, but actually it can help make a difference. But we also believe in diplomatic relations. We believe that the fact that we're there, the fact that we are trying to maintain a relationship, and as you said, for the long term, that we are speaking honestly, and I do try to do that. Of course, people say a diplomat is somebody sent abroad to lie for his country. And I'm speaking for my country. My country's interests are the ones that I'm seeking to defend. But I don't believe I do that by lying for my country. I believe I do it by speaking truthfully. Of course, I try to slant what I'm saying to make it more impressive. But I try to say to North Korea the things that I think will influence them. And that includes actually telling them quite a lot of the truth about my country and about what I understand of the United States and the Republic of Korea and other countries as well. And we can do it directly on the spot. They, of course, have their mission in London and could, if they choose or chose, do the same thing. What I've not been able to do, and I regret this as ambassador, but it was a consequence of what happened in 16 and 17, was that although we did not close our mission, we wound down many of the things that you gave some illustrative examples of. But a very clear one was a long-running program we had with British Council teachers in universities. That program was never going to stop the DPRK developing nuclear weapons. That wasn't the point. It was about engaging, about using British teaching materials, having British teachers there teaching. And we taught hundreds, thousands of Korean teachers who then went out into schools and universities themselves to teach. And we will never know exactly how much influence that had, but I'm sure it's had some influence and that it has changed some attitudes. And I do believe that there are signs of change in North Korea, even though I am not confident that the thing that my government above all else wants to achieve, which is the denuclearization of North Korea, is in the bag. It's not. We have diplomatic relations. France does not recognize the DPRK and have ambassadorial level relations. And of course, the United States does not either, or the Republic of Korea. I just say that having diplomatic relations is an aid to communication and engagement, but it's not the only way of doing it. France doesn't have an embassy, but in the building you may have seen the bronze plaque for the French Cooperation Office, and they have a diplomat there who does actually pretty much what I do, has pretty much the same access. And the North Koreans actually have more diplomats in Paris than they have in London, partly because UNESCO is there and they have diplomats accredited to UNESCO, but they also have an interest section in France. So be a bit careful sometimes about those distinctions between who does and who doesn't, because they might not be quite as significant as they looked. And it's very clear that the Americans, as we've seen this year, the Americans and the North Koreans, without diplomatic relations, can, if they choose, communicate with each other. They have North Korean diplomats in New York, but they can meet if they wish to. You can talk before you have those formal diplomatic relations, which is not an argument against forming them, and it would be very interesting to see how things go, and things might progress so that the US does, as it's considered in the past, establish a special interest section or an embassy. And just finally, on those big images, it is a problem that some pictures mean more than 1,000 words. But I think it's actually also the case that some of them really do mean a lot. And the work that has gone into constructing the Pyongyang summit with Moon Jae-in there is quite significant. And it's not just the international world that sees pictures. The North Koreans see pictures. And I wouldn't underestimate the impact it can have in North Korea for North Koreans of seeing the footage they saw from Singapore. Not just of the summit, though that's quite an impressive image for them to see the two leaders together. And it may be reality TV, but reality TV may at times, sometimes, just almost be reality. But they also saw pictures of the level of development in Singapore. They've seen the same from China. And if Kim Jong Un were to come to the Republic of Korea, were to come and address you here in front of this stage, or to address the National Assembly, whichever was the more likely, or to go to Mount Halla, or whatever it was, if those images go back to the DPRK, they can take things forward. But certainly that can't be done just by images. And I do agree that slow, steady, small work, and work individual to individual, given that actually decisions may be taken by individuals, does matter and should continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nolan, for your speech. From what you said, it's very interesting to listen. I've been told that there can be one or two questions, briefly.
Thank you. I have very small, simple two questions. One is, what kind of steps did you have to take before make the final decision to open an embassy in Pyongyang within the framework of common defense and security framework of the European Union? And the second one is the Great Britain, the interest party in Pyongyang, succeeding Sweden, or Sweden still remains as an interest party of the United States? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. In terms of the very specific security and military arrangements, I have to be quite honest and said I haven't looked into it that clearly. Obviously, as a member of the Security Council, it would have been very serious, and placing ambassadors, as Ambassador Morgan said, in other countries does provide both risks and possible obstacles to things that a country might want to do in the future, because it has people located there. Within the European Union? Before Brexit. Before, yes, because, yes, Brexit. To be quite honest, I'm not sure. I can't answer that. I'd have to look into it. So I'm not sure what happens in terms of Britain's role in the European Union with security and Brexit. In terms of special interests group, I think as obviously Sweden has been in charge to look after American affairs and things. They've been placed there, and I really think Eric Cornell's diary on that is enlightening to read from his time from 1975. And as Ambassador Morgan said, that he has to go around and report these to other things. So I think if there's a communication, if there's connection between countries, that information probably travels quite quickly. I fear that I haven't given you the answers that you wanted completely in these. The first one is because I don't know, quite honestly. And the second one, I believe they share stuff around as they do. Okay. We should stop. Very sorry.
Because thank you very much. Because we have to be out by 9 o'clock and we have to tidy up and everything. So you can come and ask your questions privately, and then afterwards we'll go down the road out the back gate and drink makgeolli and go on talking, I hope. So forthcoming events. This Thursday there's a Korean Studies colloquium in Kode with Tony Michel, pioneering business in North Korea. And then our next lecture by a very senior businessman, Yong-ho, on the amazing story of Korea's industrialization development. Our December lecture, we will tell you soon. Keep your eye on our webpage and Facebook page. And then other events. On Wednesday the 21st, we will visit the Museum of Contemporary History over in Gwanghwamun, and we will visit an exhibition, special exhibition they have about the development of the Republic of Korea in 1940s, and that will be accompanied by a special lecture by Matt from Valkenburg. And then on Saturday the 24th, we'll go to Gangwon-do, and we will follow in the footsteps, step by step, the American expedition, the military expedition, 1871-2, which ended up with rather a lot of Korean dead and very few American dead. And Thomas Duvernay has done enormous research into this. He knows absolutely everything about that expedition. It's very interesting. Last time we did this trip, it poured with rain, and we had a wonderful time. On Thursday the 29th, our Korean Literature Club will meet and will discuss the Court Dancer, a newly translated, published Korean novel in English. And then we have our Solar February tour to India. So, as I say, after this we can go out the back and go down and drink makgeolli and talk. And when you stand up, please put the chairs under the table. If you have not yet joined the RES, do please join the RES. We need lots of new members in order to keep going as we've been going. So, and we wish our special guests especially Colin, who's going to be the new ambassador from next month in Pyongyang. We hope to see him again here. Chairs under the table, please.
Yes.